I love our little theme song?
I know, it's very jazzy.
I love those trombones.
I know, there's a reason why you're going to be doing Jazz Age next.
Yes.
So this is the writing room with Step Into the Story. I'm Donna Allward. I'm here with my co-host Barbara Tanner Wallace. Between us, we got a few decades in the publishing industry, and I don't know, we're creeping up on 100 books between the two of us, I guess.
So
Yeah. So how are you, Barb?
And we're still learning every day. You're right.
We are. How are you?
I'm good. I'm like you. I'm knee deep in revisions. I'm thinking of starting like a support group for people who are revising their book, and I'm also, since I'm querying agents, if anyone wants to join my querying support group, we can all hug each other.
Right?
Like, no,
just a support group.
Full stop. Support group. The Barb support group. That's what we're going to start.
Right. Well,
Barb and Donna's revision and querying support group. Feel free to join.
Right. So I think I should be a charter member with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So tonight we're talking about our next book in a year topic, which is Characterization and GMC, which stands for Goals, Motivation, and Conflict. It's a massive topic, and I feel like I say this every time we do a writing room, but we could take like a whole day or week or whatever on any one of these topics.
Absolutely. So
I guess that for this show, it really is the quick and dirty sort of tips and tricks or high points of things to consider when you're writing. I think mostly it's about creating characters that are three-dimensional and that your readers are going to care about deeply, so that, you know, they really just want to keep turning the pages and find out what happens and really relate to the characters. Before you start writing, I'm going to bring up the first slide.
Okay.
Oh, look, the first slide is Characterization and GMC. The second slide is, so before you start writing, I think it's a good idea to get some, I'm a very visual person, so get some visuals going on and tackle some vital statistics. So what your characters look like, their hair, their build, their height, their eye color. What else did I write down here? Their age. So that, although the hair color might help determine that, and how they dress. That's another one. What their style is. There's a very big difference between someone like me who lives in yoga pants and someone who, you know, really gets up and makes sure they're put together every morning and business casual, or something like someone who's colorblind, so their socks never match or something. You know, there's all kinds of insights into character that way. But having that visual, and some people cast their characters. I know sometimes I'll scour the internet and look for someone who looks like I imagine my character would look. And it gives me a really nice visual anchor as I write scenes, because you want your readers to be able to picture that character as well. And do this for all your main characters. So even your villains, I would say. Villains need to be three-dimensional as well. So, right?
Yeah, I'm 50-50 on this visual thing, because, as you know, we never do things the same way. And so sometimes I cast, I often don't. I
know all the time
in my head, but I'm more interested in their backstory. I'm more of a cerebral person. I need to know who they are, what makes them tick, like what they need to learn, what they went through as a child, you know, what their biggest wound is. I need to know those things far more than I need their hair or eye color or how they dress. Usually that's like the last thing I worry about. And yeah, it's usually more about where they came from, what was their family life like. It's really big is what's the lesson they need to learn, what are they searching for. Those sort of things are much more important to me. I tend to use the same 1, 2, or 3 heroes every time. My heroes tend to look alike. They all look like Rob James Collier towards the end of my romance career. Sorry. They all look like that.
The evil butler.
They all look, they were all really handsome. I mean, it's with romance, I didn't have to worry so much. I think I cast a little bit more in my cozy mysteries because those are characters that I needed to live with all the time. Interestingly, I did not really cast at all for my historical fiction.
I didn't either. I didn't either. I think it's whatever works, because sometimes I cast and sometimes I don't. And I didn't for my hist fic, except for the character of Neil. And it's just because I saw, like, just when I thought about this character, an image immediately popped to mind. So that was fine, but I didn't go searching. But it was something that I used to do in my romances more. And I think sometimes because I needed to make sure, because I was writing so many, that I wasn't samey. You know what I mean?
I do know that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think, I mean, for me, it's a good place to start. I agree with you about backstory. You need to know their backstory. But when I do a character sheet, and sometimes I do a character sheet, I start with, those basics, and then I start drilling down into their backstory.
Which we will say, the backstory is, I mean, whether you do the physical descriptions or whatever, everyone should kind of do a backstory, or at least know the psychological underpinnings, because that's going to be the foundation for the next big three, which is what we like to call the goal, motivation, and conflict.
Right.
You need to know their psychological groundwork for that.
Right.
So the first one in that, since we'll jump right in now.
Yes, I'll add that to here we go.
This is goals. Oh, and I wanted to back up, because this is something I explained to someone else a long time ago. Every story has a goal, motivation, and conflict, or should, even if you're writing nonfiction or a memoir.
Oh, 100%.
You have some sort of goal, motivation, and conflict. You can't just write X things that happened. There needs to be tension, and this is what creates it.
And a question that has to be answered.
Correct. Absolutely. So this applies to everything, fiction or nonfiction. It
really
makes it a readable book. Yeah. Because I had a friend who was writing her memoir, and I was explaining, you still need conflict. It's got to be you versus something.
It's not just this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. It's like there still has to be like a story question that has to answer, and then every episode of your life would somehow address that story question.
Exactly, and a reason for them to turn pages. So, as I just said, everyone has a goal. All right, there's something they want to accomplish in their lives. They have an external goal that they want. Are they trying to save the galaxy? Are they trying to avenge their father's death? Are they trying to build a career and a name for themselves outside of their family name? These are the story goals. They're what's driving your plot. That's what's driving and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. But along with that, everyone has goals that other characters don't know about. They have things inside that they're not sharing. So, for example, take our night, you're fighting the Nazis, okay? You've joined the resistance and you're fighting the Nazis. Externally, that's a pretty damn good goal. What people might not know is they're making amends because they had a Jewish friend that they didn't stand up for 2 years earlier, and they wish they had, and now this is their chance to make amends and do something. That's something that's going to come, that they may not necessarily come on the page right away, but it will impact your story.
Right. Right.
So, go ahead.
That was really that whole trying to make amends for something that's already happened. That was the key goal, and conflict, actually, as we get through. But for Leon in Noelle Salazar's Angels of the Resistance, that I just talked to Noelle last week on last week's broadcast. And the main character was 14 when the book opened, and was not allowed to join the resistance until she was 16, but had this burning desire. But it wasn't just because they were being occupied, and it was their way of fighting back. That was externally, yes, that's a really good goal, but on the inside, she felt, and you find this out pretty early, she felt very guilty about her sister's death and considered it her fault. And this was something that drove her in her participation with the resistance and made her not just part of the resistance, but the kind of fighter that she was. And that was what was driving her. And that was her goal, was to somehow make amends for this horrible thing that happened, because she hadn't been responsible enough, and it really wasn't her fault anyway.
What an excellent example of that too, since we're still doing Nazi fighting, whatever, but is Brene Ryan's Secret Society of Salzburg.
Yeah.
There's a scene on the train where she stays silent because it's for her own safety, and they're just saying, just keep your mouth shut. And these two Jewish people are taken off the train for not having proper identification.
Yeah.
And the heroine realizes that if she's, she didn't speak up, and she hates that she didn't speak up. And she then says, you know what, someone has got to be giving a voice and helping these people.
Right. And I think that the thing is, and what then becomes part of the story is how they're going to do that. Right. Because speaking up on a train, that's probably just going to get you taken off the train with the other two people. So how do you do that? And that becomes the crux of the story. So that really does help the character and the plot along,
Right. And we should say a lot of times they should work together.
Yes.
One should drive the other or affect the other in some way. And both of the books we're working on, they both have internal and external goals as well. And they should sort of either dovetail or butt against each other.
Right. And if you look at Noelle's again, like her participation in the resistance was very much the sort of the external, and her guilt was the internal, but those worked together to not just show the different things that she did as a member of the resistance, but like I said before, the kind of resistance fighter she was, and then the internal consequences of that, and discovering who she was. So they really do work together. Otherwise, you just have a story of, they won this, and then this attack didn't go well, and it becomes very episodic. But then when you have that internal goal threading through, and creating that character arc, then it makes a huge difference.
Right. And as we said last week, your character arc should kind of flow with your act structure and going through the story, and that's how you do it, the two goals. Yeah.
Right. And that key character point is going to come at the same time as a major plot point, like those turning points will. Exactly. Well, I mean, that's how we'll talk about pacing another time. Here's what I find difficult about talking about craft is that everything works together. So I find it sometimes difficult to pull different things apart from the story, because I find that everything affects everything else. Like all your decisions affect pacing and plot, characterization, and anyway.
Right.
Sometimes I have a hard time pulling them apart.
Exactly. And a good caveat is, it's good to know all this stuff. If you think too much about it, your eyes will get crossed.
And sometimes
some of the magic.
Sometimes the best time to, and this is like totally off our script, but sometimes the best time to look at those things is in revisions, when you can actually like look at the story as a whole and then pinpoint where different things are. And if you've achieved that in a way that you should have, and then you can go in and change it or tweak it or take it out.
Exactly. I would say the same thing.
All right. So the next one for our GMC is motivation. And this is my favorite. And it's, I think it's the most important.
I would agree.
Member of GMC, even though it is the middle child. Excuse me.
But like the middle child, it is the glue that holds everything together.
It is. It kind of links everything together, and it's the big why your characters do what they do. And you'll use it in every scene. You'll use it in possibly every paragraph, like maybe not like a single line paragraph, but you know what I'm saying. It's everywhere. It's the why your characters want the goals that they do, and it is the why they act the way they do and why they react the way they do to different things. And for example, you might react, well, you definitely will, because as we've shown with writing, we're very different people. But you would react to something in one way, and I would react in a completely different way, because our backstories and life experiences are different. So our motivations and how we see the world are going to be different.
Yes.
And it's not really surface choices when you start looking at motivation. It's like, well, why did you go to the store? Well, because I wanted some chips. But it's, why did you go to the store? Well, because I'm conflict averse, and people were arguing at dinner, and it gave me a chance to escape and then go eat my feelings. Right? Like it's deeper than just one.
Lori Schnebley, I believe that's her full name. I want to say there's a third name in there, but she wrote a great book about motivation. And she does, if you ever get a chance to take a workshop with her, her workshops were fantastic. And that was one of the things she said, it's never the first answer.
Right.
Why'd you go to the store? I wanted to buy chips. Well, why? Because I was hungry. Well, why did you want chips over anything else? Because I wanted something salty, because I just had a big fight with my husband and I like to eat my feelings. Well, why do you eat your feelings? Because I was told bad to, as a girl, to never speak out in your marriage, and
right.
So
well, why? Well, because my parents did that, blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yeah, so it's never the first answer, is never the true motivation.
No. And that's honestly, that's a really good time to bring up, oh my gosh, we're so going off script today. It's great.
I like when we do.
Susan Meyer's list of 20. So it's never the first thing. If you're stuck on a plot point or a motivation point or something, you write down what you want, and then you start listing all the things, and you list 20 things, and it gets crazy after like the first 7 or 8. And then, it gets silly. And then all of a sudden you get to 15, you're like, oh my God, that's it. And so doing a really drilling down is key. So speaking of drilling down, I did an example that is in the script. And just because I love it.
Would you like to share it because it's in the script?
What's that?
Would you like to share it? Because
I would like to share it because it's Bridgerton. And as we know, I love Bridgerton. And this example is from the TV series, not the book, because the series and the books don't always, dovetail nicely. But it's season 2, and it's Anthony, because I think I love season 2 more than I loved season 1. And I loved season 1. But it's Anthony's character development and what drives him. So when we see Anthony, he is definitely not into marriage. He doesn't want to get married. And so I have 5 different points to drill down into why he is so marriage averse. So the first one is, he had to take on the title at a very young age. He was 17, and his dad died. It was very traumatic for him. It was incredibly traumatic for his mother. He had 7 siblings, younger siblings. Well, the Hyacinth wasn't born yet, but she was on the way. And so this was a huge responsibility for him to take on at a very young age when he was not prepared. And so he already has a lot of responsibility. He's not really interested in having any more. And he tells Simon that he really doesn't have to get married and provide an heir because he has brothers. They can do that, right? The Bridgerton name isn't going anywhere. But then, but why does he want marriage in particular? And so then I drill down a little bit more, and it's because he saw the way his mother was absolutely decimated after the death of his father. And so he decides at the end of the first season, after his own disastrous affair with an opera singer, that he's just going to take love out of the equation. He's just going to be a marriage for duty, to do what's expected of him. And he just wants someone who can be his viscountess and run the household, and they can get along great, whatever. But then as he sets about going to find a wife, he sets ridiculous standards for any prospective viscountess, and standards that no one could expect to meet until he meets Edwina. But why does he set those standards? And I think he does it because if he sets that, and then no one has a hope of meeting them, and then he's off the hook. He doesn't have to get married because he couldn't find anybody suitable. And he does that because he doesn't really believe in a marriage of duty, because he saw the example of his parents, it was very much a love match. And that's secretly what he wants for himself. He's really not into a marriage of duty. So he meets Edwina, and he likes her, and he likes her a lot. And but it's more than that. And if we drill down again, we see that if he is seeing Edwina, that puts him in the same orbit as her sister, Kate. And Kate does light a spark, and that's dangerous. But Kate is a lot like him in that she's put the needs of the family first. So why doesn't he just marry Kate? And this is where we finally get to it, which is Kate represents his biggest fear, which is in partly he doesn't want to lose someone he loves, but more than that, he doesn't want to be the cause of hurting somebody else, because he saw how his dad dying affected his mother, and he even says to her he could never be the cause of such pain. And that's when we really realize what a tender and like intensely feeling man he is, because when Kate is injured, I mean, he's a mess, but his big thought isn't that. It's that he doesn't want to cause somebody else that pain, and Kate could be that person because he does love her. So then, like, how many layers did we peel back there before we finally got to that secret bruise or the secret wound that he's holding on to? And it all started because his dad died when he was 17. So it really, it peels back the layers. So that's my whole spiel on like motivational layers. So now it's your turn.
Okay. Because we're running tight on time, I will say this. I will say we did an entire episode with tips on how to have good motivation, and we will put that link up on it.
Yeah.
But the psychology geek in me will tell you that there is something called the hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow of Waltham, Massachusetts created it. Yay! And basically what it is everyone has the same universal needs for certain things. We have a need for basic things first. You get your basic food, shelter, health, those things. And they can be driving motivations. When you get into more complicated things, when you have all that, you're still driven by the need for love, acceptance, accomplishment, self-actualization.
Okay.
And what I've discovered is, or what everyone's discovered is, if your character taps into one of those and they have this need that you can really identify with, you can buy a lot of what they're doing, because they're driven by a fear or that they're not going to have that need or a desperate need for it. Like a great example is Scarlett O'Hara, who is taught that the land is everything. And her biggest fear is that she's going to lose the one thing that matters, which is Tara, the land, which her father told her was everything. And when you boil it all down to that's what she's afraid of, is losing that land. You don't forgive her, but it suddenly makes what she does make a little more sense.
Yeah, it makes it understandable, right? Even when characters act badly, if you understand why they're doing it, and it gives them room for growth, right?
Right. And because a better example, because I use it all the time, is Thomas Barrow. Not just because Rob James Collier was born with perfect cheekbones, but because Thomas Barrow, when he first comes on, is the biggest a-hole on the planet. But then as the series goes on, you discover that really what he is a homosexual who wants to have what everyone else has and is in a horrible pain because he can't have it.
And when he can't have it, he does shitty things.
Right. And he's like a dog where if you kick it enough times, it's going to bite before you can kick it. And so he's constantly on guard, and he is trading power because that's security. And that's what he needs so that he never gets tossed out on the street without a reference for being a homosexual.
Right.
And suddenly, that's why why everything came around on season 6, people were like, oh, no, I really like Thomas Barrow. That's because he had that underlying motivation, and it allowed him to grow. He wasn't just a cookie cutter a-hole.
No, yeah. All right, so why don't you tackle some conflict?
Okay. So remember the laws of physics. In every force in nature, there is an equal and opposing force. Can you tell that I live in a science-based house?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Physics. I'm married to an engineer. But that's exactly the same thing for your novel. For every internal and external goal, there exists an equal and opposing force. Now, external conflict is it's kind of self-explanatory. Your character wants to achieve X, so there are obstacles preventing it. Your hero wants to save the planet. The alien invaders don't want to, or the government entity doesn't want him to do it. So there's your external conflict. Your internal conflict, we just finished talking about the goals and what's motivating them. They want revenge, or they want to join the cool clique. They want to be a famous model because I think that that's what's going to make them happy. And we should have talked about this. We didn't talk about this when we talked about goals because we wanted to wait till now. But oftentimes the motivation and their internal goal is what they think they want. It is not always what they need.
Right.
And therein lies your internal conflict, because as much as they want, say, want fame because they think it's going to be the key to becoming getting all the love they desire, the universe is going to throw at them what they really need, not what they want. And they're going to be faced constantly with this choice of, do I go this way and take what I want? And is that really going to make me happy? And there's constantly messages from the universe going, no, you really need this over here. And it's really big in romance because the woman, the husband or the wife often thinks, well, this is what's going to make me happy, this arranged marriage. And then over here is Kate going, no, I'm what you need. Love, 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 until they wear them down. So I think that's the key to everything. When what they want flashes what they need. I think that's conflict in a nutshell.
Right. I think what conflict isn't is an argument. And I would see this a lot when I was editing and when I would just like judging contests or reading like early writers' work. And sometimes the mistake would be made that, that they think that conflict is your characters arguing or having differences of opinion. And I think that is more of a symptom of a bigger disease, right? The argument is like the manifestation of the conflict. And you can have enemies to lovers. You can have characters whose goals are in oppositions and they're going to argue, but the argument is not the conflict. It's just a vehicle that you use, hopefully sparingly, to highlight that conflict. But conflict is much deeper than just your characters arguing. So when you hear the thing where Donald Moss said, conflict on every page, that doesn't mean arguing on every page. It means, make sure that those things that are in opposition are at play, throughout your whole story.
Right. And you don't want to manufacture an argument. A lot of times is manufactured conflict.
Right.
So the character acts out of character just because they feel like they need to have a fight to make it like the
to create the tension. That's not really,
to make it look like, and then and it drives me crazy when you read a story where they're like the person suddenly starts bantering and saying stuff just to be a jerk because you need to have that, you want to have conflict.
Right. Or, they think that there needs to be tension. So that's how there's tension. But the tension comes from things like subtext. And like there are a lot of ways to show tension in a story that are not characters arguing.
Right. And we should say the one other rule about conflict that's been drilled in our heads since we began writing, which is if it can be settled with one discussion, that's not really a strong conflict.
No.
A lot of times you'll get the conflict of he just never told her this whole story for some weird reason. And then it he gives her the truth and you're like, oh, it's all resolved.
If they can settle it over conversation,
yeah,
then that's not a strong enough conflict. And again, that is all going to stem from their motivations.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it can be settled over a cup of tea, it doesn't go that deep. But when you have something that is so ingrained and so baked into who your character is, that's not something that's going to get resolved easily, right? It's the whole, you drill down on the why. So we have one more slide, and it is talking about our fifth, because we always do 5 points, and it's a little bonus called emotion. And I think your reader has to relate to your character and get really invested in your character for your story to really resonate. And the way they do that is by you bringing your character's emotions to the page. Now, the way that you do that can be really difficult because a lot of times it means opening a vein and you have to bleed on the page. And it's really hard sometimes to be that vulnerable. So, my biggest tip here relates to not really mindset, but I guess I put in the notes like heart set, right? And
I
being
like that
willing
phrase.
being willing to go there on your own personal level because it makes us vulnerable too. I mean, every character is filtered through us, and so there's a little bit of us in every character. So when we put a book out into the world, it says something about us as well, and so it can be really hard to be vulnerable. Um, and so we need to be able to walk in their shoes, see things through their eyes, and then really relate that through their feelings. So, for example, I couldn't write a child in jeopardy story for a long, long time because I had small kids. And so there was no way I could write something about a kid being kidnapped or a kid being like super sick with cancer. Like these are all like my biggest fears. And I just couldn't let myself be that vulnerable in a story because it scared the hell out of me. But then once my kids became older and hit like 20 plus, then I went back and I wrote Danger Next Door and I was fine with it. I mean, it was hard. I still had to like, open the vein, but it wasn't, I was willing to go there in a way I hadn't been willing to before. Um, so yeah, I think that's my main thing with emotion is that be willing to, and if you watch the episode with Noelle, she explained her way of getting into the emotions of her characters, which was really, really kind of. I mean, she said it was funny after a while, and she started putting it on Instagram and stuff. But she would lay on the floor with haunting music and headphones, and just like let those feelings wash over her, and she'd start to cry. But then she really tapped into it. So, however you do that, but I think getting into your character's emotions is key to making them memorable and really keeping your reader, hooked and making your story unforgettable.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I don't really have much to add, except that I will say for those of you who are not every writer cries at the scenes. Not every writer gets so, you can be vulnerable and not weep. And I just say that just because so people don't feel paranoid, like, well, maybe I'm not being vulnerable enough because I'm not
Right.
not sobbing. It's like, no, you can still feel it in different ways. I'm not a crier as much as I am getting sick to my stomach or whatever. You can put yourself in people's shoes and you can be vulnerable.
Right. You don't have
It's
to
more of
cry.
a don't feel bad if you're not sobbing.
I don't cry anymore, honestly, unless it really surprises me. I used to when I first started. I would get to a point. There would always be one point in the book where I'd like tear up, and then I did start to think like maybe I'm not doing this right because I'm not crying anymore. But I think it's a matter of like just how you develop as a writer. It's not necessary.
No, I'm not one of those people that cry at my writing. And you'll hear people say, oh, if I wrote the scene and it made me cry. I've written emotional scenes and I felt emotional scenes, but I think it's not always a prerequisite. But I agree with everything you say. You need to be able to identify. A lot of times if you tap into a core, go back to the core needs.
Yes.
If you don't have to identify like with being a vampire, for example, but you can identify with being an outsider and that need to find a connection and stop being alone and loneliness. You can identify with all of that. So that's where you want to drill down and tap into that thing that the character has in common with everybody.
That human core, right?
Exactly.
Right. So what's coming up next week, Barb?
Oh my God.
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah, next month is going to be a fantastic month. We're going to start it off because we're going to talk about Sadika Johnson's Book of Eve, which is a Reese Book Club pick this month or month of March, and we want to brag and say that we had picked it before Reese did.
We did pick it before Reese. Wow. We had it picked like in December.
As soon as we saw it,
it's happening.
Yeah, largely because I read The Yellow Wife. Donna has it on her.
I have it on my Kindle.
Sadiqa Johnson's Yellow Wife was one of the best books I read in 2021. The House of Eve is definitely up there as one of the best in 2023. She's a wonderful writer. We can't wait to spend a half hour dissecting this. There's so many moving pieces in this. We can't even describe it. So you're going to want to listen to that. And then we have a really great featured author coming up too.
We do.
Yes, we are interviewing Lauren Willig, who is, both of us, it's one of our auto buys. Mm-hmm. It's like you see a title by Lauren Willig and you buy it.
And brand new book.
Yes, and I can't wait. I'm super excited.
Right. 2 Wars and a Wedding. It's a great title, don't you think?
Yeah, I am very happy.
Yeah.
And then our writing room, we'll be doing kick-ass openings.
Very good.
So how to open and start running. We're actually going to get you putting things to page, pencil to page this time.
That's it.
That's it. So come back next week to listen to us talk about Sadiqa Johnson's House of Eve. Pick it up. You will not be sorry. It's a wonderful book.
All right. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for coming.